But in this first hour, a conversation with former Democratic presidential candidate, spiritual leader, best-selling author, and now candidate for chair of the DNC, the Democratic National Committee, Marianne Williamson, joins us live in studio. She's the first of those who are running to join us. We'll bring you all of those voices in the days to come. But Marianne, welcome back to the studio. How are you today?
I'm great, and thank you for having me. It's always good to be here with you.
It's my honor to have you in studio. Let me just start with this. I want to get into the DNC and why you're running and all of that. We got an hour to work that out, and I'm glad you are the first of the DNC candidates to come see me. So thank you for that. But let me just ask you your read of this moment. I don't want to color that question any more than that, but your read of this American moment.
We are currently in the process of a dictatorial takeover. It's not that it might happen. It's not that it's on the horizon. It's happening as we speak. And his actions are the shock and awe campaign that many had foreseen. I think he fashions himself on Viktor Orban in Hungary. He had said in one of his debates with Kamala Harris, he talked about Viktor Orban, who of course is the dictator who replaced the liberal democracy there. He said he's a great guy, he's smart, he's respected, he's a strong man. Well, I don't think that Donald Trump necessarily knows that in politics the word strong man is not a compliment. It's someone who exercises dictatorial authority backed up by the military. Now that particularly concerns me because I think there's a connection there to the Pete Hegseth appointment as Secretary of Defense. I don't think Trump wanted a qualified person for that position because I don't think he wanted someone such as a Lloyd Austin, such as a Mark Esper, who would say, no, sir, you can't do that if he suggests something as outrageous, let's say, as shooting somebody, a protester, in the leg. He wanted somebody who would just say yes, sir, no matter what. You mentioned his taking down the gun violence prevention website. He took down women's reproductive rights. He took down the Spanish-speaking page. He has said there will be no more civil rights investigations or prosecutions for discrimination. He has told all health agencies no meetings until further notice. We're talking about people who are having meetings about the bird flu, cancer, deafness. They've taken $190 million for children's cancer research out of the spending bill. I mean, this is very, obviously very serious stuff, and it's happening now, and that's my read of this moment.
It was quite the week last week, Donald Trump's first week. You saw what I saw. We talked about it every day here. Deportations, firings, pardons, a blizzard of executive orders. It was quite the week. You heard Marianne say a moment ago that she sees this moment, her read of this moment in American history is one of a dictatorial takeover. That was her phrase. I was saying to Marianne during the break that there are a lot of people that I think that I'm hearing who I think believe that we're putting way too much on this moment. Yeah. These phrases, dictatorial takeover, anarchy, oligarchy, I could run the strong man, you used that phrase earlier, I could run the list. And they're like, hey, y'all fools just lost. We spanked your behind. We won in every key swing state. You lost. So, don't put all that on it. Why you got to call it anarchy and oligarchy and dictatorial takeover? You just lost an election, Marianne. That's it.
Well, just because you lost an election doesn't mean you weren't right.
Yeah.
And the fact that you lost an election in a free society doesn't mean you're supposed to go home and shut up. I mean, a free society is one in which all of our opinions matter, whether we're in power at the moment or not. And that's really what's happening here. It's an existential crisis for the very idea of a free society. So you don't get to tell other people in America to shut up. And you don't get to tell them that just because we lost an election. Perhaps if someone says it's hyperbolic to say this is a dictatorial takeover, perhaps they haven't read very much about what a dictator does and is. America has a way of doing neo-fascism with a smiley face. So people who don't look too deep say, well, that can't be fascism because they have an idea of what it looks like. But in 2021, it doesn't necessarily look like anything other than then life seems to be pretty much the way it was until you look just beneath the surface, and it's absolutely not People are afraid. People are afraid to speak up. People are afraid that if they say a certain thing, they might lose their job. People are afraid because they know that I couldn't bring any kind of a case of anti-discrimination if I'm treated badly at work. People are afraid. Women are afraid in terms of control of their own bodies. That's really what a dictatorship is about. It's about when people stop feeling that they can spread their wings however they want. That's why this is such an inflection point in democracy. There are two different views of the world. One is, as you were mentioning in something you said earlier, we are a multicultural, multiracial, religiously pluralistic society, and everybody gets to be who they want to be, do whatever they want to do, as long as they don't hurt anyone else. Now, that is one way of looking at the world. I believe that that is the worldview that is established by the Declaration of Independence. There are other people, and they find what I just described as threatening, even annihilating to the identity that they believe is the real America. It tends to be white, it tends to be Christian. That doesn't mean every white person, every Christian has this view.
Sure.
But there is such a thing as white supremacy. There is such a thing as Christian nationalism. And those forces are definitely a part of the Trump agenda. You don't need to look any further than Elon Musk's comments, what he's doing in Germany and so forth. And so these two worldviews, that's what the struggle is today.
If Donald Trump, let me phrase this the right way, Marianne. If Donald Trump were such an existential threat, if the return of Donald Trump was going to put us in a space of dictatorial takeover and oligarchy and anarchy and strongman, if we knew that he was, and in fact we must have known because everybody kept telling me he's an existential threat, why didn't the Democratic Party take that more seriously? And why did they not do better? Now, if I was sitting in your seat, I could answer that question in a myriad of ways, and I'm sure you will in a moment when I shut up. But when I say do better, there's so many ways to unpack that. When I say take it more seriously, there's so many ways to unpack that. But you can't tell me that he is an existential threat to the democracy and then show up, or to the point, not show up in the way that Democrats did or did not do. If you take my point, I digress. The mic is yours.
First of all, I don't think anarchy. I don't think dictatorship is anarchy. And actually, it's a suppression of people even saying what they want. Strongman, definitely. Oligarchy preceded Donald Trump. Donald Trump just puts it on steroids. The problem when you talk about why didn't the Democratic Party, this has a lot to do with my running for DNC chair. The Democratic Party has been held hostage by some people whose lifestyle isn't going to change one way or the other, whether Donald Trump is president or someone else. Franklin Roosevelt said that we would not have to worry about a fascist takeover in this country as long as democracy delivered on its promises. When you have 1 in 4 Americans living with medical debt, over half of our bankruptcies are medical bankruptcies, 70 to 90 million people uninsured or underinsured, 1.3 million people rationing their insulin, people selling their blood plasma in order to make it. Obviously, democracy is not delivering on its promises. So I believe that the Democratic Party built a big hole. And Donald Trump walked into it. And if it hadn't been Donald Trump, it would have been someone else. The Democratic Party swayed from its essential principle, which is advocacy for the working people of the United States, unapologetic, unequivocal advocacy. And ever since they started taking, for instance, the DNC started taking corporate money in the 1970s, starting pretty much around the time of Bill Clinton, the Democratic Party started acting as though we want to have it both ways. We want to help people, but not so much that we will go beyond the line at which now you're starting to you're starting to offend your corporate donors. So the Democratic Party, you know, we have to start looking at desperate people, large groups of desperate people, as a national security risk. Because large groups of desperate people, inevitably, if you have even the most rudimentary knowledge of history, forms a kind of petri dish out of which all manner of societal dysfunction arises, including attraction to a political strongman, including vulnerability to ideological capture by genuinely psychotic forces. Anyone who had taken any kind of historical viewpoint would have seen this coming a mile away.
If Washington, this is my phrase, not yours, but if Washington is bought and bossed by corporate money, on both the left and the right. How do you respond to people? I hear this all the time from persons who are just disaffected by our politics. They will make the argument that there ain't much difference between the Democrats and Republicans. It's all one big party. Washington, again, is bought and bossed by corporate money. What is the difference? Now, I think I can still make the argument that there is a difference between the two parties. But for persons who feel that way, given that you've just admitted that it's all bought and bossed by corporate money, what's the difference between the GOP and the DNC these days?
Well, there's not enough of a difference.
Yeah.
But at the same time, if you look at actual individual Democratic leaders, senators, congresspeople, and so forth throughout the country, there is a big difference. The issue is the face of the party. And so I understand people saying to hell with it. I'm not going to vote for either one. I'm going to go third party, or I'm going to
vote for the couch.
Listen,
Yeah.
I said that throughout my campaign in 2024, that our biggest opponent would be just the feeling like, to hell with it, I'm not going to vote for either one. Mm-hmm. The problem, as I see it, though, is that we don't have time for the Democratic Party to fail. I'm the last person to be naive about the corruption of the system, given what I've experienced, and I feel we don't have time unless you have a few $1 billion lying around that you want to start a third-party force. We have to try to stop the bleed. We have to intervene here, and we have to try to take the House back in 26. So I believe that given that, listen, everybody has to follow their own heart and their own conscience. I'm not judging anybody, actually. But I know for myself, it's like, we've got to take the Democratic Party back for the Democratic Party. You know, a lot of people in the Democratic Party look at people probably like you, like me, and it's like we're trying to hijack the Democratic Party with our progressive views. No, actually, they hijacked the Democratic Party. We're Franklin Roosevelt and Eleanor. They're the ones who are they become the new Whitneys and DuPonts and Morgans. And too many times the people speaking for the Democratic Party are actually speaking from a perspective that Franklin Roosevelt was speaking against.
I'm glad you went there. Your mind and my mind, we're in sync in this regard. So when I'm in sync with your mind on a spiritual level, that's a good thing for me. But I was thinking as you were talking to ask you the following, then you went there. To your mind, why does the Democratic Party steadfastly refuse to be more progressive in its stance? And we could discuss the issues, ad infinitum, ad nauseum. But broadly speaking, they continue to resist this pull to be more progressive in their policies. What is that resistance about?
Well, what I learned in my race in 2024, somebody up there, and there's something very shadowy about all of this, to be honest, Tavis, because the DNC is such an opaque organization, like exactly who is making those decisions, such as we will suppress a primary. One of the things I realized about my own race was there are people who are in control here who would rather lose to Trump than to let someone like myself be the nominee.
What's that about, though?
I'm not sure.
I mean, Cornel West has told me the same thing. Bernie Sanders told me the same thing. I mean, publicly and privately, everybody has basically said the same thing. They would rather lose than to let someone like me run the party.
That's exactly right. And I saw it firsthand, and I've experienced it. And that's why I'm running for DNC chair, because that system has got to be, we need to take a velvet hammer to that entire way of being. What it is a few people and their consultancy firms. It's a handful of consultancy firms on K Street in Washington, D.C. And it's been fascinating, actually, talking to so many members. The members of the DNC, some really good people, good people. But it's opaque to them. I mean, they don't even know, the budget committee doesn't know the numbers. They don't make any of the information public. Members say they come to meetings and they're just told things. There's no real sharing of information, power, or even money with the states, which would certainly completely change were I to be chair.
Speaking of money, I had, who was it the other day? Christine Pelosi, Nancy's daughter, on this program the other day, and I've talked to others who have made similar comments, which is that one of the first things they want to figure out under the new leadership, whoever that will be, is where all this money went. You mentioned all the consultants. $1 billion+ raised, number one. Number two, there's still a debt after that money. But number three, where did that money go? What's your have you thought about that?
Of course, I've thought about it,
Yeah.
and it's I think there's less to figure out and more to simply say those days are over. We're not going to do that anymore. And the people who are part of that, one of my fellow candidates said the other day about these consultancy firms, he said, well, if I become chair, we're going to review all those contracts. I said, if I become chair, we're going to tear them up.
We'll cancel those contracts.
Yeah, well, there's not going to be any reviewing of those contracts. In any other field, the level of abject failure. I think a lot of people in the Democratic Party have not really taken in the level of failure here. We lost the House, the White House, and the Senate. Plus, let's not forget how many state houses have not only gone red, but have become super majorities. So anybody in any other business, anybody who took you to this point, they will not be taking you further. And that's why I think I would be the toughest boss. I was laughing at some of my fellow candidates the other day. I said, because they're all talking about how we're going to figure out and maybe do things differently. I said, no. No, what you need to do is make sure it's a whole new team and a whole new paradigm and throw out that playbook.
I assume you believe that you fit this profile. But let me ask this question anyway, because if it turns out not to be Marianne Williamson, tell me more, and I'm going to ask this question of everybody. What is the profile of the kind of person that the Democratic Party needs to be its titular head in this American moment?
That's a great question. This is the thing. The DNC is a very 20th century organization. It's so old-fashioned, and there's some people out there who think it's so sophisticated. And in modern business terms, it's very unsophisticated. It's very top-down. It's somebody up there makes the decisions and dictates to everyone else. The perfect profile, and while I believe that I would be the best for the position, but
sure,
that's just my belief.
I expect that.
Yeah, thank you. Is a 21st century model where the leader is someone who stands in the middle and holds the space for the brilliance of others. You have people who are party operatives around the country. These people know what they're doing. They have been with these states for years. They know more. Like one man from Kansas said to me, how the hell would some consultancy firm in Washington, D.C. know the messaging that I should use with a farmer on a tractor in Kansas? So we need to completely shift the paradigm to make it so that the power and the decision-making and far more money is given to the states. I'll give you an example. You were talking about the $1 billion, and you know that the right wing is funding its agenda with billions and billions and billions of dollars. So when I first became a candidate, I was shown this contract that the DNC had written up with its state parties. Okay, and I was told that we were going to have a phone call, a forum on this, and would I please read it? And I read that they have a $2 million fund, red state funds for over, I think it was 2 years or whatever, and that every month these people were going to be given $2,500 more a month. And I read that and I thought, well, surely a zero is missing. And then I continued to read, and like we're talking in things like $3,000, $5,000. Wait, what? And then I start doing my calculator, and then I'm thinking my calculator must be broken. And then I go back and I realize, oh my God, you are expecting these states to take on this behemoth of right-wing takeover in this country funded by billions of dollars, and you're thinking of, well, we're going to give them $2,500 more a month. That somebody, whoever wrote that contract, has no intention of winning.
Yeah.
Has no intention of winning. So the person who fits this profile, and there's some very good people who are running, don't get me wrong, but someone who knows how to win local races in a Midwest state does not necessarily have a sense of the larger energetic of what Donald Trump and MAGA is presenting to the country, much less how to fight it.
I wanted to ask you this when we came on the air, so here goes. There are many people in this audience. I don't speak for my entire audience, but I know this because I talk to them all the time, and I hear from them on social media posts, et cetera, et cetera. They come on this program as guests, obviously. But there are a lot of black folk right now who ain't feeling white women. They're just over white women. And they're over white women because white women keep abandoning us at these key moments. White women didn't make Barack Obama president. White women abandoned Kamala Harris. The data is incontrovertible. What say you about a white woman now running as chair of the DNC when a whole lot of the base black folk, the base of the DNC, just ain't feeling white women right now, given their abandonment of us and our issues. White women in this last election voted against their own interests. Marianne, I digress.
What about white men?
Well, that goes without saying.
Yeah, well, hello. I'm saying it.
We expect y'all to have a bit more sense, though. That's the point.
Yeah, I get concerned anytime a group is judged like that.
That's fair. That's
Many
fair.
tens of millions of white women voted for Kamala Harris.
That's fair.
And I think that the Democratic Party, I think it's somebody's consciousness that matters. Mm-hmm. And I feel for Kamala Harris as a human being. I feel for her. This has got to be a very difficult moment. But in terms of the Biden-Harris campaign and how I was treated, Dean Phillips, Bobby Kennedy,
Cornell, all of them. Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah. I get your point. They abandoned y'all before you abandoned them. I take
and I
point.
voted for Kamala, and I said I was voting for Kamala.
Yeah. I think what the DNC is lacking right now, and has for some time, frankly, but what they're lacking right now is what I would call visionary leadership. They're lacking the kind of leadership that would connect to King's edict, that what we need right now is a revolution of values. I think that those persons who I have heard who will be guests on this program running for chair of the DNC are, to my mind, Marianne, are playing around the edges. And I think that's problematic. I think in a moment like this, we need real visionary leadership. We need real talk about a revolution of values, again, to quote Dr. King. And I just see people tinkering with the edges into what you and I were saying earlier. I think people just think that Democrats lost because they didn't do things better. Well, I don't think it's marginal at this point. Does that make sense?
My fellow candidates are political car mechanics, and some of them are really good political car mechanics, and I admire that. But we need someone who says this car is on the wrong road. Mm-hmm. Franklin Roosevelt said, he was speaking about the presidency, but he said it's not about administrative leadership, it's about moral leadership. Mm-hmm. And the prophetic voice of the Democratic Party is lacking, and that's what that vision needs to be. And that vision needs to be that all men are created equal. The vision needs to be that God gave all men inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, from the beginning of this country, there have been those, just as there are those now, who would obviously transgress against those ideals and even behave atrociously in order to make sure that they're not manifest, starting with slave owners. Mm-hmm. But whether it was pushing back against slavery, pushing back against institutional suppression of women, whether it was pushing back against segregation, whether it was pushing back against the Gilded Age, we should see this moment in the context of that great historical struggle. Because today, a matrix of corporate powers, too often enabled by our political parties, actually seeks to place its profits before the safety, health, and well-being of the American people. This is what the Democratic Party should stand for, is that resistance to an economic system which places greater resources for the few at the expense of the well-being of the many.
I've asked this question of others. Let me ask it of you, and you're on that path. Let me follow you once again. To your mind, what does the resistance look like over the next 4 years?
Well, first of all, it looks like having a DNC chair who says what I just said and doesn't pussyfoot around it. Insurance companies, pharmaceutical companies, gun manufacturers, big food, big agriculture, big chemical companies, big oil and defense contractors, and big financial institutions, and to some extent tech. These are a new oligarchy. Whether people like the word or not, that doesn't mean that the word does not apply. And we are living at a time where there's been a $50 trillion transfer of wealth from the bottom 90% to the top 1% over the last 50 years. It has decimated our middle class. We have 70% of Americans who say they live with chronic economic stress, over 60% of Americans who live paycheck to paycheck, people who are selling their blood plasma in order to pay their rent. Lives are falling apart in this country. Also, that a billionaire class, and now with this president, what you've got is an actual ideological perspective which just says to everything I just said, yeah, so what? They actually think it's better. They are not. We need to be the keepers of the story of what America can be, the idea that everyone should be able to self-actualize. You have millions of American children who go to schools where they don't even have the adequate resources to teach a child to read. If a child cannot learn to read by the age of 10, then the chances of high school graduation are radically decrease. The chances of incarceration radically increase. That child was born with the same God-given potential as a child born in another neighborhood, right? Where is that child's ability to self-actualize and pursue happiness?
I read a couple different surveys, polls of late Marianne Williamson that suggest that there is a majority, if not a plurality, of Americans who now believe that our best days are behind us. You believe that?
I think if we continue in the direction we're going, that's at least a valid question and supposition. Now, yeah, I mean, we need to interrupt the decline, but the reason we're in a state of decline is because we have dropped the story, the vision, the profundity at the center of the very ideal on which this country was based. Now, once again, from the beginning, we were in a struggle. It's baked into the cake between those who actually believe those ideals and those who would transgress against them. I mean, 46 of the 51 signers of the Declaration were themselves slave owners.
Indeed.
We understand that.
Yeah.
But if you look at the struggle we're going through today, within that same context, it's just the latest iteration of that struggle between those who believe in freedom and those who find it inconvenient to their financial and or ideological purposes.
I'm one of the persons who knew you, and I suspect there are many others listening right now who were aware of you and reading your stuff before Oprah exposed you to the masses. So I knew you before then. But I've always known you to be the spiritualist that you are, and I'm always fascinated by people who are anywhere in the spiritual realm who still believe that there is value in offering themselves up as a public servant or coming anywhere near the specter of politics. As a spiritualist, why does this stuff matter to you? Why would you want to be in this cesspool, Marianne?
When back at the late 90s, I wrote a book called Healing the Soul of America. And I had wanted to talk about spirituality and politics. So I took a deeper dive into American history than I ever had. And I read about Gandhi and Dr. King. Gandhi said politics should be sacred. He didn't mean religious as in doctrine and dogma. He meant it should come from the heart. It should come from the gut. It shouldn't just be this shallow conversation that emerges from a part of the brain that is an inadequate response to the times in which we live. Dr. King went to India. He studied the principles of nonviolence. He brought them back to apply them to the struggle for civil rights. Both of those men led the two most powerful, most successful political revolutions in the 20th century. And what I realized was we don't have to reinvent any wheels. Nonviolence says, the political nonviolence says that there is a place in all of us, an inner light, the love in all of us, and that not only does that heal our personal relationships, it heals all social, economic, and political relationships as well. And that is the only, Einstein said that we would not solve the problems of the world from the level of thinking we were at when we created them. We must evolve our thinking. We must evolve, like you said, our values. We need a revolution of ethics. We need a revolution of values. We need a revolution of heart. And when we do that, we realize the very ideals of this country, of the Declaration, are a moral and spiritual as well as political ideal. And without that, we have no vision. And without vision, this country is going down.
What happens in this critical American moment, Marianne Williamson, if Democrats make the wrong choices?
The wrong choice will be if we make it based on an administrative ground game as opposed to the visionary leadership that you and I have been talking about. There's one man whose race is funded by a billionaire, Reid Hoffman. It's the same old continuation, and this does really make me fear for the party, and that's for my country. There's another man who's a leading contender, and I think he's a big thinker. I think he'd talk to other people besides just the administrative political technicians. We could have a kind of team of rivals here. That's what I would do. The problem we have, as I see it, among the candidates is that nobody is taking on the larger question, how do we deal with that adrenaline rush that Donald Trump represents? How do we dwell at that same level of emotional and psychological frequency? I think the only thing that can defeat his lies is big truths, real truth, whole truth, nothing but the truth, and what has happened to this country, the corporate takeover of this country, the fact that the government has become system of legalized bribery. We must have this. We must stage this platform of genuinely fierce opposition and loyal, but fierce opposition to what Trump is bringing. Someone who is willing to call out not only the political and economic transgressions that his system represents, but also the immorality of it. The fact that they represent a system that is willing to tolerate so much human suffering here and around the world, that is willing to tolerate the desecration of the planet, that is willing to tolerate so much limitation of people's God-given potential. That is what I would represent as chair. If we go the direction of just mere administrative details and a continuation of that billionaire-driven system as it now is, then we all have something to be concerned about. But even within that system, there are people who know better, and we have to continue to have faith and continue to persevere and continue to make sure that Donald Trump and what he represents does not prevail.
She is Marianne Williamson. Many of you, most of you, all of you know her work in the spiritual realm. Amazing work there. And she answered the question brilliantly. I didn't know what her response was going to be, but when she went and got Gandhi and King, it made all the sense in the world to me. So thank you for taking that question and all the other questions you've answered in this hour. Marianne, good to have you on. All the best in this campaign for DNC Chair. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much.